Okay, I don't see any further speakers, so we're going to call this meeting to order, and this is our council meeting for Monday, October 7th, 2013. And the first item of business is adoption of the minutes of the council meeting held September 23rd, 2013. Do we have a mover and a seconder? So moved by Councillor Morison, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing no hands, all those in favor and opposed? All right, those meeting minutes are adopted. Now moving on to the approval of the agenda. Do we have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that the October 7th, 2013 council meeting agenda be approved? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Any errors, additions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Our agenda is now approved. And we're going to move right into delegations this evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have two delegations tonight. The first of which is the Parksville Community and Conference Center Society presenting us the 2014 annual budget and 5-year financial plan. And I think you know how this works from previous times. The floor is yours. Normally we would ask to within 10 minutes, but given the subject matter and the requirement, we'll go through it as need be.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Sprout, and this is Tom Roy, the president of the Parks Community Center Society. We're here to present the 2014 budget. There are some new items in the budget that were not in the 2013. We do have, under the utilities, there is a water bill. We are now putting that into our account because we're going to be charged for water. Under the kitchen rentals, it is up quite a bit higher because we are looking at some new products that we need to replace some of the equipment that isn't working properly. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. As you can see, our projection for 2013, the amount we got from the city was less because we did end up with a revenue at the end. So we gave the city their share, which is 50%. And also we've capped our operating reserve that we'd requested, so that saves the city another $20,000 this year.
Okay. Is that the extent of the presentation?
Pretty much.
Just leaves more question time for us, right? All right, so I'll open the floor to questions. I see multiple hands. I believe Councillor Lefebvre, you were first, and then we'll go to the left here with Councillor Powell and then ultimately Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Margaret and Tom, for coming this evening. There was a time when you were reporting on strictly the budget operating costs for the building, and I see that that has changed this year. I have to do change some columns around to figure out how much it costs to operate and maintain the building each year. And the reason that I look forward to that is because people have to understand how important the building is and how much it costs to operate and maintain the building. And I would like to suggest that in future that you return to that kind of reporting system, because it's people don't realize that it's not only the Parksville Community and Conference Center, it's a building, and the building costs a lot of money to operate and maintain.
Yes.
It's because the way this budget's presented, it's pretty hard to separate the facility rentals and all the other things that go with the conference center, but are not building related. My last comment is that with regards to the building, the city's on the hook for the capital cost over $5,000, and that should also be identified, because that's something that we'll have to forecast into our budget, our budgeting program.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your report. I'm just curious on the hydro one, with all the talk about hydro going up in the next 2 or 3 years. Have you accounted for that in your projected budget?
We just did an extensive retrofit of our lights, which cost us over $26,000, putting in new LED fluorescents and new LED type lights where our ones in the seaside were. So the cost is starting to level. Our rates are not going up. We're hoping we'll see. They're guaranteeing us a reduction in our costs once we have everything done. So.
Thank you. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks very much for your presentation. You mentioned a couple of savings that the city has made here. Could you repeat those?
We had a capital operating reserve, which we had requested, which was $20,000 per year until we reached a $60,000 cap. We've already reached that cap. So the city contributed $20,000 and the rest came from us. And we do a 50-50 split with any extra revenue we have. And we gave the city back just over $13,000 this year.
And from what I see here, you're asking for another roughly 7,000 more?
Roughly, yes. So.
It's a little confusing to give the city back the money and then ask for some more money.
But we try, like what we do is we project our budget, and then I try my hardest to cut it as much as I can as we're going along. But I don't want to give you a bare bone budget, because if I do that, I'm going to be coming back to you and saying, oh, I've goofed and I need more money. It's better for me to do it this way and give you back at the end of the year. I know it's confusing for you guys, but it doesn't happen often that we have that much of a difference. It's usually only a small amount.
Well, it's not as much difference this year as it was last year. Because last year, if I can remember right, it was 24,000 or something like that.
Last year we didn't, for the 2013, that was the one I'm talking about that we gave you back.
Anyways, I'll have to give this some thought. Good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation, Tom and Margaret. I have a number of questions, and really there are a number of comments that I would like clarification on. To start with, I see that with the pictures that you've put on, that in fact we now have the lift stage, so that people with accessibility problems can in fact get up onto the stage, and I congratulate you on having that, and I think that the council should be congratulated on putting money forward for that particular situation. I see, however, that there's a listing down here of $20,000 for a lift for the stage. What are we talking about there, and are you planning on coming forward for more money with respect to what is that notation for on page 23 of 101?
Are you looking at capital expenditures? The lift was something that we were looking at, but now that we got the grant from the city, that's no longer an item. I've just left it there so you knew what type of items we were looking at.
So it's not something that we're going to have to deal with in the future?
No, I've already, and the man lift I've also purchased, so I now have both of those little ticket items.
And again, a couple of things with respect to the effect on the budget, both the budget and projected for 2013. I've been looking at the numbers coming through here, and in fact, with respect to rentals and expenses and the amount of revenue that we've generated from those special events, it seems that we're uncertain as to what's going to happen. Our expenses are going up significantly. Our events are going up. Can I ask you the question? What is the effect of Kris Kringle pulling out going to have on our budget, or on your budget, I should say?
To be very clear, it probably will not make a lot of difference. It will reduce our labor costs. It will reduce some of our expenses that we do have. I have got final notification from her today that she has canceled, and I do have people booking in. So we do have some large bookings that are coming in to take place for the dates that she had reserved. So I don't see that it's going to be a great loss. It'll probably actually be a little bit of a
wash.
A wash, even because the labor is very intense for Kris Kringle. Okay.
Actually, one of the things that I have here, we have banquet chairs of $60,000 spread over 2013, 14, 15. Have you actually purchased those chairs? Are they in place? Are we $60,000 for banquet chairs is a significant amount of money, plus the cutlery and the dishes and the things that you're looking forward in the future. Have we actually expensed those? Are they in place now, or where are they?
We're just in the process of putting in the order. We've broken the order so we can make it affordable. It sounds like a lot of money, $60,000, but I've actually beaten them down. The chair was originally $105 a chair. I've got them down to $75. It's a very good chair, and the problem right now is our chairs are done. They're spent. You sit in them, they moan, they groan, they create. Biggest complaint we have from renters is, beautiful place, but we hate your chairs. So it is something that with this type of building, it is something that needs to be maintained, unfortunately. So we're trying to cover the cost of it as much as we can to offset it. Again, if our special events go the way they are, we're not going to have to come to the city. We might be able to take that off as a capital reserve for a project for the future. Like, we might be able to pick up some of that cost ourselves. And that's what we're struggling for right now, is to try to do a few more special events where we can generate some more money, so then we can go to the city and say, okay, you're going to give us $20,000 for a capital project, we're going to match that. And that's what we're trying to do.
Will you have these chairs and the additional things available for the AVICC, which is in next April? I think we will be having some events within our structure.
I will have 400 of them at least by then.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this is the chair that you pulled me out of the hallway and made me sit in that day when I was walking through, minding my own business, I might add.
Well, I need people to try it out.
Yeah, no, and I can say for council that this is that chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a night and day comparison to what was presently the case. So I think that will go a long way to making it a more attractive facility for sure. Chairs are important, right? Any other members of council with any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Powell Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for coming tonight, Tom, Margaret. Just quickly on the chairs, awesome. The chairs that we have in there are ridiculously uncomfortable, and so I'm really pleased to see some new comfy chairs. Is this feeding back? I'd be able to hear some feedback over there.
We have a gentleman in the crowd that's giving us a feedback.
Margaret, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that the conference center has been able to give back some of the money to the city. Is that accurate?
No, that's not correct.
No?
In 2008, when I started, there was a 50-50 split with the profits that were left from there.
A follow-up question, please, Your Worship?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one other time. Does this mean that you've had a really good year? Are we getting lots and lots of use out of our community center?
We are, and we're doing bookings already into 2016. So we're becoming lots of regulars, lots of repeat people. Those are the ones that we want, are repeat users, and it is starting to really flow.
And the whole center seems to be busy. It's not just like one or two rooms. That anytime I've been over there, the whole center seems to be getting booked up.
We're trying to utilize as much space as we are. And a lot of times somebody will phone and say, oh, do you have availability? And we'll say no. And they'll say, oh, but we didn't see it on the event on our calendar on our website. But we don't put private bookings on there because people have requested that. So there's lots of times you could phone and say, oh, it looks like I can get in on Thursday. And we're not. We're booked all day. And then sometimes we have bookings in the night, so we're flipping the rooms to use them more than once, which is our goal.
So it's well used?
Yes.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions? Councillor Morison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question on the equipment rentals, because it bounces up for 2014, and you'd mentioned that you had a specific function. Is that just a specific event you're looking for that you need some different equipment for? Because is that your kitchen stuff that you buy for the rentals, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Oh, and one other, just a
go ahead.
unrelated question. You're still running the movies at the PCCC?
We are. We actually have some starting this week.
Okay.
Starting on Wednesday to Sunday.
Excellent.
Okay, so I don't see any further indication from council. Surprisingly, Councillor Lefebvre, go ahead.
Thank you. One final comment from me. In looking at the report that I just received this evening when I sat down at the table, is that I tried to do the math on the building. And I think the big advantage of identifying the building separately is it's a good chunk of money, and then the other stuff is a lot easier to understand in terms of focusing on the revenues from the rentals and the kind of capital things or the equipment things that you're buying, so that we're in a position to make that decision. I just did the math very quickly, and I don't know from the section on the staff what staff is dedicated to the building and what staff is dedicated to the conference side of it. So if you could straighten that out, I think that would go a long way.
Okay.
Building here, rentals over here, revenue over here, it makes it a lot easier for us to understand.
Okay, we do have a recommendation in our package, Council, and that recommendation is that the 2014 annual budget and 5-year financial plan for the years 2013 to 2018 presented by the Parksville Community and Conference Center Society be approved. Do we have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Greer. On the recommendation, any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to ask our second of the two delegations to come forward. And this is a delegation from the Parksville and District Chamber of Commerce, and it's regarding the proposed development cost charges bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. These chairs are terrible. So maybe if you could spirit a couple of
Let's
the new
not
ones
get
over
carried
from
away
the,
now.
Over from the.
We don't want our chairs in here to be too comfortable, you realize.
Got it. Got it. So we're here to discuss the proposed DCC bylaw. The Chamber has looked at the overall package, not so much from the perspective of the technical aspects, but more from the impact that this could have on the community, the industry, and how we move forward with our economic development goals to raise the average wage and lower the average age of our community. We first wanted to look at the competitive aspect of the DCCs. We recognize that, first of all, the city has a set of services that need to be paid for through some through taxation, some through the direct sale of services, and some through development generated revenue. But we need to be competitive. We need to have a program that possibly works. There we go. So the creation of a competitive advantage with our neighboring communities is critical. In the city budget, there's a number that predicts the revenue that's going to be realized from development-generated revenues. This number relates directly to several numbers on the expense side of the budget. And if development goes across the city boundaries, that revenue is not going to show up and not going to be able to be spent on the targeted capital projects. I'm just going to skip through these ones that I thought I was clicking through and get to the one that I'm on. So if we're not competitive, and as you can see from this chart, we're currently charging the highest DCC rate in the mid-island area. The chart shows Comox as higher than what we're currently charging, but that $14,000 up there does not include the $7,000 and change that has to be paid to the RDN for every single-family home that's built in the region. So we are charging currently the highest DCCs in this area. And compounding that issue, we're pushing development away from Parksville. We've just seen a number of subdivisions go up in the regional district around us, particularly in the area around Oceanside Middle School. And making this issue somewhat worse is people that are purchasing those homes and moving into them are going to enjoy the services that the taxpayers of Parksville are paying for by using our roads, by using our parks, by coming in and using the facilities and the services that are within the city boundaries that are paid for by city taxpayers. So we would like to recommend that at a minimum the rates remain as they currently are. And actually we'd like to see them drop to start to drive the kind of revenue through development that we need in order to build the infrastructure pieces that are in the schedule. The next piece I want to talk about is the downtown. Redevelopment, beautification of our downtown. In 2009, some very good work was done by the Economic Development Office, and one of the reports brought forward was the Parksville Downtown Revitalization. And it proposed, among other things, a facelift for many of the tired buildings in the downtown core. This would be a fairly inexpensive way for landlords and businesses to perk up their premises and put a fresh new face on the downtown. But there was no uptake at all. And one of the reasons that was given anecdotally to the Chamber at the time was that when people who were interested in participating in this facade program realized that their expense was going to be more than the $50,000 trigger point and that DCCs would then be charged, they backed off. And I can attest to at least 2 people that talked to me, and I know that there were more that came to the Chamber at the time. So we're recommending that the downtown be a DCC-free zone. Okay, within the Act, there's some leeway for the Council to declare certain areas as DCC-free, and we're hoping that in your deliberations that you consider the downtown to be a DCC-free zone. The next piece that I want to talk about is obviously what triggers a DCC. The current bylaw, the current city bylaw, states that DCCs will be charged on the approval of a subdivision and the issuance of a building permit where the construction value exceeds $50,000. And the Local Government Act states that there's some conditions where a DCC is not payable, and the DCC is not payable if the development does not impose new capital cost burdens on the local government, and a development cost charge has been previously paid for the same development unless the new development will impose new capital cost burdens on the local government. We would like to see that $50,000 amount change. This has historically been there for a long period of time as far as the actual $50,000 number. Times have changed, inflation, building costs have changed, and in order to move forward with things like I just talked about with regard to some of the beautification projects in particular in other parts of the city besides the downtown, we'd like to see that $50,000 trigger moved up to $100,000, and we would like to recommend that there be something included in the bylaw that DCCs will not apply to projects where it can be demonstrated that there's no appreciable impact on the infrastructure. Next topic is density considerations and the impact of density on DCCs. And I just read a very interesting report, and I'd certainly be happy to make it available to Council, although I think you probably have it because it was a study that included Parksville. It was written in 2003 by a company called Coriolis Consulting, and it was done for the West Coast Environmental Law Group. This report included both Parksville and Kelowna as subjects, and it asked the question, do development cost charges encourage smart growth? And what we want to, I guess, bring up and as a topic for discussion is that we believe that DCCs should be used to encourage the kind of growth and development that we really want. I much prefer the carrot to the stick, and I think that the DCCs or the use of DCCs and some changes to the bylaw can be used as a carrot to create the kind of growth that's not going to have as heavy an impact on our infrastructure, that's going to use existing infrastructure, particularly with regard to infill projects, brownfield projects, and possibly look at what true costs arise from developments that are maybe on the outskirts of the community where we have to stretch our infrastructure a little bit further. I was just in Kelowna. I went to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce annual general meeting, and I haven't been there for some time, and I was absolutely blown away because they've started to use density as a defining point for DCCs. They have, I believe, 6 different designations for single family and a couple for multifamily homes. They take into account how many units per hectare, and the more units per hectare that there are, the lower the DCCs, even on a single family home subdivision. They've done this. They've encouraged density. This encourages more compact neighborhoods. It restricts sprawl and creates a situation where the infrastructure installation is less expensive, thereby lowering the DCC requirement. They've got a revitalized downtown. They've added several public amenities because they're bringing in revenue from the development permit process because people want to build there. The developer contribution portion budget of their budget is 5%. In Parksville, developers contribute 10% of our total budget. That's double. And yet they're able to do all of these marvelous things with a smaller percentage of the budget. Their budget is obviously much larger than ours. And that's another piece that I think that we should be looking at as far as our competitive nature. Developer contributions in Parksville make up 10% of our total revenues. That puts us 24th out of 159 municipalities, well above the, and 7th out of 27 BC municipalities of a similar size to ours. And that's well above the mean, which is 3.4%, and well above the average, which is 5.5%. So we think that there needs to be some other options. Okay, we know that the city requires revenue. I mean, we represent the business community. We all know what a business model is. We know that you got a revenue side and an expense side, and that they have to meet somewhere. But I think that there's other options that we can explore for other revenue sources so that we can be competitive. And I want to keep coming back to that. We live in a competitive world. We live in a competitive market. Development is a very mobile business, and if we allow ourselves to get priced out of the marketplace, we're going to see that development go to other areas in and around us, which means that we're not going to see those development revenues from development cost charges because development's not going to happen here. I think I included in the larger report that I sent to you that there was a significant drop-off in building after the 2008 development cost charge increase. I know there was an economic slowdown at the same time, but the drop-off was much more dramatic in Parksville than in other communities in and around us and across the province and across the country. And I just want to emphasize the competitive nature of what's going on. So in closing, we would like to work with you with regard to finding ways to develop other revenue sources. I've got a couple of examples that are near and dear to my heart. We've been spending a lot of time with the energy sector as the hosts of the Business Energy Advisor Program, and I was very encouraged when I read a report that the District of West Vancouver installed a turbine in place of a pressure-reducing valve in their water delivery system. The turbine harnessed energy that was previously lost in the pressure-reducing station. The unit's got a capacity of 2 megawatts and generates approximately 1.1 gigawatt hours of electricity each year. This free electricity represents about 20% of the power consumed by the District of West Vancouver. That's an example, okay? There are other examples of municipalities that have other revenue streams that I think that we could probably emulate, and I think that we need to maybe spend some time as a community and do some research and figure out what it is that we can do here along the same lines, whether it's working on the expense side by, I know that the city, I've had some calls from the operations people, and I'm really pleased to hear that they've been inquiring about LED streetlights. That will represent an enormous saving in electricity, which can then be applied to other infrastructure projects. So in closing, we know that at the end of the day, the question on how to proceed is based on what you want to achieve. Chamber would like to see downtown revitalization, an increase in the commercial tax base, which means more commercial enterprises, not an increase in individual business taxes. And we believe that infrastructure is more efficient in higher density development, be that multifamily, small lot, or more single family units per hectare. So our recommendations are to retain the current levels, retain the DCC rates at the current levels, and look at other revenue sources, including energy projects, possible tax increases. We need to look at other opportunities to make up any revenue shortfalls. We recommend that the downtown and the industrial park be identified as DCC-free zones to encourage infill and redevelopment. We recommend that the $50,000 trigger point be increased to $100,000 to allow for beautification projects if additional infrastructure beautification projects. I don't know how that last line slipped in there, but ignore it for me, okay? We are recommending that DCCs for higher density single-family, multifamily, and commercial projects reflect the savings available in capital costs where density is considered on both land area and floor area per unit. We really think that building smart and using the DCC program to attract the kind of development that we want to see in the community is a positive use of this tool. And that a clause be inserted whereby if a developer can demonstrate that their project does not place a capital burden on the city, DCCs will not be charged. We'd like to see that right in the bylaw. And that when council agrees to waive DCs on a project, the amount of DCCs waived is transferred from previous year's general revenue surplus and placed in the appropriate DCC funds, as opposed to the current practice where waived DCC amounts remain in the overall DCC schedule and is shared out amongst the developers paying DCCs. So, thank you very much for your time, and I don't know if there's any questions on this, but
I suspect there would be, but before we do that, perhaps council will just give me some latitude. I suspect what we should be doing is referring this to staff so that staff can look at it in greater detail than we can certainly do in a quick discussion here. If that is the case, then during the discussions on referral, I would certainly entertain any questions or any kind of comments to Mr. Burden, if that be the choice of council. All right, so we have a mover to refer, Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell. Okay, so now on the report and the referral, then are there any questions or comments from members of council? I think Councillor Powell, you had your hand up first, and then you have Councillor Greer on the left. All right, so we're going to have a few. So go ahead, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your report. After I read the report, I did go to staff, and it's my understanding that when you're doing beautification projects or facade upgrades, then unless you're increasing the footprint, DCCs don't apply. So could you give me the examples you're talking about?
I'd have to ask the landowner's permission, I think, before I start giving you examples, but I know, like I said, of at least two that came to me and said they weren't going forward with their facade projects because it was going to cost them the DCC charge. But I'll check with them and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
All right, Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Burton, for the research and the information you've given us. I've done a fair amount of research on this myself, and over the years I've always thought that the DCCs were a little too much. And I agree with most of the ideas that you've brought forward. I think most people don't realize today that we're in a whole new reality of where things are going. We're not going to have the abundant growth that we did in the latter part of the 90s and the early part of the 2000s. We definitely have to find some revenue sources so that we're not going to have to increase the taxes a great deal, because I'm certainly not for that as well. So we have to be pretty inventive in how we're going to do this. But I agree that putting the DCCs up any more than what they are now would be disastrous. And I do agree with the 50,000 moving to 100,000. I do agree with the downtown freeze taking place as far as DCCs are concerned. I think this is very important for the city of Parksville, how we move forward. And people will just have to realize that we're in a different world today than we were 10 years ago. And I think we have to be more inventive of how we raise money, and I think the mayor's got some ideas tonight that he's going to bring forward on how to raise some money, and that should be interesting. But I do agree with your presentation, and I would hope the council would take a long look at this before they make any hasty decisions to raise all of these DCCs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greer. Thank you for the trailer. Any other members of council have any comments at the moment? Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation. I have one observation to make and then four quick comments. My observation is on page 27 when you do the comparisons. I noticed how much more expensive it is in Qualicum Beach for Parkland and Storm than it is in Parksville, and yet you leave the sewer sides blank. Why is that?
Because the information wasn't available.
Ah, okay. Well, maybe Qualicum. I'll have to talk to my colleague in Qualicum Beach about that. Four comments, and I know he's in the audience. He's hiding.
I was going to say he's probably got a meeting he's got to go to in a minute. My first comment is that if folk are under the impression that by raising DCCs that's going to solve all the problems, and if what happened in 2008 repeats itself in 2013, and given the economy, it's more than likely it will. Then the taxes, that's one of the bigger items that we have, is we'd have to raise taxes. And we'd have to raise taxes big time. The second comment I want to make is that building single-family homes, and this is a discussion we can have, is a loss leader for building most single-family homes. In other words, single-family homes don't pay the taxes required to cover all their infrastructure costs, and that can be proven mathematically. The third point is that right now in Parksville, there's all kinds of home building that's starting up. Wren's Road, for example. Ultimately, there could be 165 homes built there, which is on the outskirts of town. It's urban sprawl at its best for our small city. And lastly, I think that one of the things that's missing in all of this, and we can talk about it more, but I think that DCC should be waived for anybody that wants to build long-term or permanent rental housing, because we're in dire need of rental housing in our city, whether that be in the downtown area or in the higher density area. But I think that rental housing is a big lack in our city. So those are my comments. I think we could have this discussion up until 2 o'clock in the morning, but there'll come a time after staff's report when I think we should sit down with the public, with everyone, and have a discussion on this, because it is serious business, and there are implications for all of us as taxpayers, depending on how this thing is going to go. We are definitely between a rock and a hard place with this topic. There's no doubt about it. And when you're between a rock and a hard place, it gets tougher.
All right, thank you. Don't see any further hands in the air. I'm going to be, my mistake, to my left, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I just have one more question. Like I said, I did do some research after the chamber meeting on Thursday, and I did go down and I spoke with Fred, I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name, in engineering, and he basically took the cost of putting the infrastructure in the ground in today's dollars, and that's part of the increase. And so I don't think it's very feasible to leave it the same as it is or lower at this point. As well, I think that it's a pretty big wish list at this point, and there's got to be a lot more research. And they've already looked at taking some of because I had a conversation with Michelle Jones about the proposed projects, and some of those have come off as well to take that number down lower. So I think from our perspective, we are working towards that, but in reality, we have to be realistic with what our position is, because you have to pay for what you get. And so I don't think it's fair to expect the taxpayer to take on that burden, and so that's my position on it.
Go ahead, Mr. Burden.
Sure. I don't disagree with you. We have to pay for the infrastructure somehow. I recognize that. I guess what I'm saying is that we'd like to see it paid by DCCs. But if the DCCs get to a place where it's no longer palatable or profitable for a builder to come and give that money to the city for the privilege of building here, then we're not going to see that revenue. and those projects are going to have to be paid for through some other means. Building development is a portable market. There are other jurisdictions where people can go and invest their money if they are in that business. In order for us to attract that business, we need to have attractive rates, we need to have an attractive environment, and we can probably get more revenue by providing a lower rate and being marketable than we can at going to a rate that's not very attractive. We can follow, I did a little newspaper article a while ago, we can follow the BC Ferries model where we raise our rates when our traffic goes down and expect people to come and pay the higher rate and the traffic to increase. That's not realistic. We can lower our rates and take the benefit of the higher traffic and fill in some of the gaps in our downtown, get the industrial park fully developed, fill in some of the empty lots in our inner core. There's lots of opportunities to see that revenue come into the city, but if we raise the DCCs beyond what's competitive, then we're not going to see the developer come here, we're not going to see the buildings, we're not going to see the revitalization and the redevelopment, and we're not going to see the revenue that's going to pay for that infrastructure.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And thank you very much for your presentation, Kim. I have a real significant problem with some of your figures here. But let's use one of the figures of $6,000, the difference between the $14,000 and the $6,000 that we might possibly be increasing it somewhat like 45%. That seems like a tremendous increase. Now, if we look at it on a basis, though, of an increase since 2008, which hasn't occurred, going out for another 18 months to when it would be put in place if it did occur, we're now looking at 2016 or 2015 that we're looking at. So during that period of time, there's been a tremendous increase in costs of building, costs of food, costs of virtually everything, costs of putting infrastructure in the ground. What we have here is if we look at a $300,000 house, $6,000 is 2%. So who's going to pay for the increase in the infrastructure? Is it going to be the new home buyer that we might possibly be asking to pay? You know, if a person is going to be paying $294,000 as opposed to $300,000, there isn't a lot of difference. You know, he or she, if they're going to buy a house at $300,000, they're not going to see a lot of difference in that figure. You know, it's a 2% difference. When we look at, if you go up to a higher level of house, and we're talking of say 450 or something like that, and there's something that's going to be done, you know, it's even less on a percentage basis for the people that are coming in here. Now, it depends on who we're trying to attract here, who we presently have at the present time. I mean, I was over to see some construction that is being done this afternoon, and in fact, the people were quite happy with the process of what was occurring. They're quite happy to pay the amount of DCCs because it was their own property. They're doing things on a carriage site, and you know, people come here for the quality of life. They will come here, and builders will build what people ask of them. Now, there's a lot of landholding that is being held, and we have a couple of illustrations said tonight as to nothing is happening with some of the SLR1 lots. Maybe they're not marketable. You know, maybe in fact we should be looking at something else that is more marketable, and in fact we're charging more money for it. And these are all questions that really have to be looked at and explored. As far as the stats that you gave us, many of the stats going from 2005 to 2013, in fact, they show very little change. The only change, the only hiccup was in fact in 2008 when in fact we all went into recession. And some of it's coming back more quickly than others, And in fact, ours is not coming back as quickly as we might have hoped. But, you look at some of the statistics, and as Councillor Lefebvre has said, where do we fit? I mean, we have a distinct problem with respect to water. We've got to put that water plant in. We've got to put in that new intake plant. And not only do we have to put it in, we have to have the water treatment plant to be able to service on going out. So we're in a situation where, okay, where are we going to get the money? Tell me where we're going to get the money without putting it on the back of the present taxpayer. And if the present taxpayer is the only one who's going to pay for it, then we should be downsizing on the type of upgrade that we're putting in and the new plant that we have.
Well, the growth projections for the next little while through the OCP process that you just went through are very, very small. So to be thinking about putting the whole of the water treatment plant onto that growth, you're probably not going to realize the dollars that you require. The city's got a significant surplus right now. There's opportunities for grants, and even if there aren't opportunities for grants, in the worst case scenario, the city has to shoulder the whole burden of that $24.5 million, which I believe is what the city's share of the water treatment plant is. And you're going to have to go and borrow some money to do it. You've posted surpluses over the last 3 years, I believe, of about $3 million a year. Is that 4 years? You wouldn't necessarily have to raise taxes to service
that would
alone.
be accumulated, though.
Yep.
Accumulated.
Okay. I'm not sure that it's time to be painting such a dire picture. Okay. I think that you've been very good stewards of our tax dollars, and I don't think that I know what's going on with the DCCs has a lot to do with the water treatment plant. But I also know that water treatment plant is something that we've been told we have to do. It's not necessarily something that is being done to satisfy future development, which through all predictions is going to be very, very small. And as far as what happened in 2008, two things happened. There was a worldwide recession, and we put our DCC rates up. The building permit values over the whole province of British Columbia dropped by 17% over the 4 years following. Parksville dropped 58%. Nobody else was even close. And I acknowledge that part of it was the recession. And as far as it being a 2% increase in a home, and people come here for quality of life, they can go live in the subdivision next to Oceanside Middle School for quality of life too and save the $2,000, and they're going to do it.
All right, thank you. So we want to move this along. I think I want to just get a couple of words in. First and foremost, thank you for putting forward your recommendations. We've been seeking, obviously, input from various groups and ultimately the public as well. There are a number of things here, actually, that the city's already looking at, so it's good to see that we're in concert. We're certainly looking at ideas around presenting different DCC rates geographically in different zones, and I know that in Kelowna there is an example or examples of that, as well as looking at it from a density perspective. I'm not sure of all the details with respect to anything that's getting in the way of revitalization, but obviously if it's not related to growth and capacity need, there shouldn't be a DCC charge associated with it. So we'll certainly look into that, make sure that people are not turning down or not moving forward with their facade improvements on the basis of DCCs alone. Interestingly enough, turbines, it was actually you that brought that to my attention some time ago. That's already in the works with our staff to look at it in terms of our high pressure areas in our water system and in respect to not using a pressure reducing valve. And ultimately, I think this report will help us in that journey of trying to find all of the various pieces and parts of the puzzle and see what would fit well for us here in the city of Parksville. It is difficult, and I would just remind everyone in the room, the DCC bylaw itself is not a political document. It's a reflection of capital need as it relates to growth and capacity. That's not to suggest that politics don't enter into it or that council can't make some fairly big decisions around how DCCs are ultimately collected and how we pay for infrastructure. But my advice has been to, for instance, the Oceanside Developer Construction Association is to look at the details of that document, the technical aspects, and I realize you weren't speaking to those, and I think ultimately what we want is fairness. So when we look at a project like the water treatment plant, it is important that we proportion it appropriately to what is actually needed for growth and what is obviously as a result of simply maintaining the status quo and our supplies. So I think with all of those things in the works, when we come back, we will have something that will certainly be much better informed as to what our options are, and then Council will be in a good position to start making some decisions with regard to how we're going to move forward with our DCC bylaw. So thank you very much for your presentation. And while you have a front row seat, is there any further comment in regard to referral to staff? All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. So yes, thank you again, Mr. Burden, and we'll be in touch. All right, so we're going to move into the reports phase, and the first report, ladies and gentlemen, is from our Director of Community Planning, and that's consideration of a development variance permit, 803 Sunray Close. So I think I would ask you, Mr. Russell, if you could give us the background, please.
If I may, Your Worship, the city has received a development variance permit application to vary section 618.3A, which limits the minimum depth of a lot to 30 meters. The applicant is requesting to vary this minimum depth from 30 meters to 16.1 meters. If approved, this would facilitate a potential subdivision application of a standard size lot that is essentially a wider lot but a less deep lot. As of to date, prior to the preparation of the agenda, 1 comment was received. In addition, today 12 more comments were submitted as part of one package.
All right, thank you, Mr. Russell. So what I would like to do now, ladies and gentlemen, is invite members of the public to speak with respect to the application for a development variance permit to vary the minimum lot depth requirement from 30 meters to 16.1 meters in order to facilitate subdivision at 803 Sunray Close. Is there anyone in attendance who would like to speak, ma'am? By all means, come forward. And what I would like from you, if possible, is your civic address and name, and make sure, if you can, the red light is on that microphone. There's a button there. You're good to go. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Maybe the second time around will be easier. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I must say, you look a lot better in person than you do in the newspapers. I actually voted for a few of you. So I didn't vote for all of you, but maybe next time. You just never know. Okay, my name is Ann Davis. I live at 82. I don't know if you have the public notice sheet where you can slot where I live. I live at 824 Sunray Road in Parksville. The lot that is wanting to have a variance on the size of it is Sunray Close. And as I said previously, I might refer to it as a cul-de-sac. Okay. Now, there's only 5 houses on Sunray Road where I live. Now, it's kind of a crazy thing in the sense that one is actually on the waterfront. You think it's Gateshead. But there is a little plot of land. I don't know. Maybe that's when they made one of the Gateshead streets we have. But I have of the 5 houses, mine is the newest house. It was built 10 years ago, and I've lived there 10 years in January. And now I've been in that community or on that street I'm the second oldest of the 5 houses. So I've kind of seen things happen in a neighborhood, what happens. And Sunray Close there's been movement. Lot number or house number 816, it's one of those houses that sold in 6 days in the spring. I mean, put on the market, 6 days later, it's sold. So there's 3 things I basically want to say is that I want to think that there's fair play out there for the people on Sunray Close. Because 3 of the 5 houses were built prior to my house, but they would have been built, I would think, somewhere in the 1990s, late 1990s. And these people bought into a concept of a cul-de-sac. And yes, the lots are larger than a postage stamp, but if you look at the map, they're certainly not as large as many lots in that area of Parksville. And so the three central lots, that's house number 809, 816, and 810, to me are newer houses. And these people bought into, there's pluses for cul-de-sacs. I mean, I've never lived in a cul-de-sac, but to me, there's safety for your children. You know, people aren't driving up and down the road. So to me, I would think that that would be a plus thing for a buyer. The lot sizes, the second thing is that lot sizes here vary, but they're not really huge on Sunray Close, the difference. I mean, I could be out quite a bit, but actually I don't think there's a lot of difference in the size. I'm concerned about lot number 809, which is next to the lot that's wanting to divide, the privacy for those people. We're all affected by our neighbors. And yeah, I've had, and I'm not saying where I live now, but you know, neighborhoods change, but this is going to squeeze another house, apparently, in between. That's what I'm told. It's going to be a house. The last thing I want to say, and I guess this is where maybe I'm being self-centered on this. I live on Sunray Road, and I live opposite of 803 on Sunray Close. And I am fearful possibly there could be asked of the city of Parksville to put an access road from the lot closest to Sunray Road so they can get out instead of having to go through Sunray Close. And that would impact me greatly because where my driveway is situated, it would be very, I'd manage, but I think it would be, I could picture it being possibility of injury because of just the visibility alone. Other than that, thank you very much for listening to me. And I do try to be a good neighbor, and I will be, no matter what happens, I will be a good neighbor to Rick. Okay? Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much, ma'am. And just one comment as you're departing. Speaking about concerns related to your property is never self-centered. That is what this process is all about. That's why you're in the immediate
Okay.
area. So
Well, I
you can
just,
feel okay about that.
Yeah, I'm very
All right.
proud of my house, and it means a lot to me. This is a nice community.
All right. Thank you. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak to this item? All right, sir, please come on down, and you have the microphone. Looks like it's already live.
Require my name?
I'm sorry, could you restate that?
Require my name?
Well, you know, it would be helpful for the record,
Jim
yes, sir.
Troyanik, and I'm the one that lives at 809 Sunray.
All right, sir.
Close. And to tell you the truth, I'm a little miffed by the previous speaker. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, there's not a problem. He's probably one of the best neighbors I've ever had. And putting in another house in that area is going to do nothing but enhance the area because right now it's a vacant lot, and before he moved in, it was just a bunch of bush, okay? So everything is, as far as I'm concerned, is hunky-dory right now. I don't have a problem at all, and to my knowledge, the other three neighbors in the circle do not have a problem. And I would rather see a new house in there than a trailer parked on the lot and rented out or a rental built. So I would like this council to do the right thing and allow Mr. Johnson to build his house on that lot because there is lots of room for the house that he wants to put on there. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else wishing to speak to this? Yes, sir. Come on down. And it looks like the microphone's live. Floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Rick Johnson. I live at 803 Sunray Close, the property that I want to develop. For the lady on Sunray Road, I will not be putting a road through my through my hedge to the back of my yard to go to that lot. It's impossible. The road to that driveway will become from the cul-de-sac beside my house, not on Sunray Road. I just want to verify because she had her information a little mixed up, so I just want to clarify it. There will be no road going behind my place.
All right. Thank you for that, sir. Do we have any further speakers to this issue? All right, seeing none, Council does have a recommendation before us, and that recommendation, in effect, is to receive a report and would facilitate this subdivision should it pass. Is there a member of Council that wishes to make that recommendation? Councillor Morison moved, seconded by Councillor Powell. And before I open the floor to questions, for the benefit of those of you in the gallery, we do have actually a significant amount of correspondence that's just come in with respect to this application. My quick read of it here, it is a form letter, but it's been passed around the neighborhood. These are all in favor, about 15, many of them in the Sunray Close, Sunray Road area. So that's just something that Council is digesting. And I'll open the floor to any comments or questions. And looking at the mover, you don't want to? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. Question through you to staff. How many letters were sent out? How many neighbors were consulted on this project? Since we've got about 12 to 15 that have responded in the positive.
Looking by the arm movements, I believe he's making a calculation as we speak.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Lefebvre, in addition to the subject property owner themselves, looks like 15 other lots, or actually more than that, sorry. It appears that approximately 20 lots were provided notice.
And I'd just like to repeat, Your Worship, what I said the last time when this project came up, that the owner has the opportunity to build a carriage house should he so choose without getting any kind of approval. And I had an interesting comment this evening that I hadn't thought about, whereby you'd rather have an owner than have a renter. And I think I'd be in the same position too, so I'll be supporting the motion.
All right, thank you, Councillor Lefebvre. Further comments from members of Council? All right, seeing none, I'll call the question on the recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. Moving on now to our next report, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have Mr. Russell give us the background with respect to your report regarding the consideration of a development permit application 549 Island Highway West.
If I may, Your Worship, as part of any subdivision application where there's more than 2 lots are being created, legislation requires that 5% of the land be dedicated as park, or alternatively, an applicant or council may consider cash in lieu of park. Where that money is collected as cash in lieu of park, those funds are specifically for future parkland acquisitions. So in this case, we have an application for a 4-lot subdivision. Oh, sorry. Am I in the wrong? Oh. I'm sorry, you guys.
You had me scrambling there, too, because usually it's my screw up.
Okay, this one's a bit simpler. If I may, we have a development permit.
All right, somebody erase the tape. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, we have a development permit application of a fairly minor nature to amend the parking lot layout at the Temple store. If approved, the development permit would facilitate 3 additional parking spaces, as well as the tree removal necessary to facilitate those spaces. The change in parking layout is primarily as a result of road upgrades in the vicinity of Island Highway and Bay Avenue.
All right, so we do have a recommendation before us, and I see a mover in Councillor Greer and a seconder in Councillor Powell-Davidson. Is there any discussion on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Powell, and then Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to say that I did go to that area today, and I know that I work right across at the family place, and I know that this business has lost 3 other parking spaces to the widening of the road. I also had, one of the questions I was asked is how come the development permit process kicked in, and it was my understanding it was because there was a change to the land use. Is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, to clarify a little bit further, it's based because land alteration is proposed. So they're proposing to actually modify the land. And there are exemptions for building additions, but there aren't exemptions expressly for land alteration itself.
Okay, thank you. Anyways, I think it's a really good solution. It works really well for that area.
All right, thank you. Councillor Neufeld?
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I went over and spoke with the gentleman that owns this property, and it's fascinating because I spent an hour with him on Sunday evening. The property already has had an accident occur exiting what will now be a 3-stall gravel parking lot where a person has tried to exit that land, make a left-hand turn around the median, and has collided and damaged our sign. I look at the issue here as being one of safety, where the roadway has come down from 2 lanes down to 1 lane, and we have a small opening where when there's anything more than just casual traffic, it's going to be backed up, and particularly at that light. We are going to be facilitating the implementation of the light within the next 10 days, 2 weeks, and I can see a problem just with the location of the that gravel access. Now the asphalt covering is there for the dumpster. There are 2 dumpsters in the back, and you know, that type of thing is required just to get rid of the garbage. But to put in 3 additional parking stalls there, I think is really superfluous. The number of stalls that are in front on a paved parking lot, you know, provide a tremendous amount of access. The gentleman that I spoke with last night said people don't like to park there, where the new installation is. They would prefer not to have to make a right-hand turn onto Bay and then a left-hand turn into the parking stalls. And there's going to be further problems as far as making a right-hand turn into the new gravel parking lot and then a right-hand turn out of there. You know, in speaking with the gentleman last night, he's the epitome of what we're trying to attract to the community as far as a lifestyle entrepreneur that is investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into a facility, and I think that the city actually could have done something for this gentleman with respect to the situation that we presently are faced with. I think that the situation of putting a 3-stall gravel parking lot in there is going to cause a safety issue with respect to this location. Love to see the gentleman there. I spent some time with he and his wife, and really quite happy with what he's trying to do. I look at the situation, though, as far as this gravel parking lot, as being dangerous.
All right, thank you, Councillor Neufeld. Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Your Worship. I disagree with Councillor Neufeld. I went over and walked through the property and saw the size of it, because that was one of my concerns as well, is the back in, back out, and how they get back onto the highway there. And I'm very well satisfied. I'm sure there's enough room. The city engineers have looked at it. It's a pervious gravel parking lot, which meets the drainage issue, and I think this is the best situation that we can come up with.
All right, thank you for that. Further comments? Well, the only thing I will add, if indeed our interest is ensuring our businesses remain open and servicing our community, then I can tell you about this business a little bit. Since I'm in it myself, it's all about convenience and quick access by your customers, and I think that this development permit will go a long way to ensuring that he continues to have that convenient component to his business. So, no further ado, no further comments. All those in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous in favor and carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on, Mr. Russell, to one of your favorite reports, which is consideration of cash in lieu of park for proposed subdivision 795 Island Highway West.
If I may, Your Worship, hopefully I'll be able to do as well as I did the previous attempt. So, as mentioned previously, where more than 2 lots are created as part of subdivision, a parkland dedication of 5% of land or the cash equivalent is required. I should point out that the cash that is collected as cash in lieu must be used by the city for future park acquisitions or park infrastructure acquisitions. In this case, the proponent is proposing 4 lots and cash in lieu of that park.
And that is the recommendation before council. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Greer. Any discussion? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just curious, and maybe staff will be able to answer this. This is 795 Island Highway West. Don't we have a permissive tax for 100% for this property? Can somebody explain that to me?
Go ahead, Mr. Russell.
If I may, Your Worship, the tax would be applicable to its current configuration. Once those lots would be subdivided off, they would no longer be the beneficiary of those because they would have a new legal description.
Okay. Further comments, questions from members of council? All right, I'll call it. All in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. All right, Mr. Russell. Next one is item D, which is, of course, a consideration of our sign bylaw. Could you please introduce?
If I may, Your Worship, through to council. So a number of years ago, the city undertook an initiative to review the sign bylaw of the day. Due to other project commitments, that that project was sort of put on the sidelines for a while. We've now had an opportunity to revisit that bylaw proposal and have basically completed a draft for council to consider referring to the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Association. We had received prior comment, as I said, a few years ago. We believe that comments received have been addressed. The specifics of those changes are outlined in the staff report.
All right, thank you for that. So I think Mr. Russell's explained it quite succinctly. And you do have a motion, or rather a recommendation before you, Council, that ultimately this be received and then forwarded to those organizations for further comment. So moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Paul Davidson. And I take it then, as I read in the report, the draft has already taken into account some of the suggestions that were made back in 2010. So, of course, it would probably be appropriate to just have everyone have another look to make sure we're still on track. So, any other comments? Go ahead, Councillor Morison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As noted in there, I made previous comment on this. I just wanted to make sure that this not only goes out to the Chamber of Commerce and the Parksville Downtown Business Association, but also goes back out to the sign shops that it went out to, both in anybody doing business in the area. Just for their feedback, there was very little came back from them. Most of it looks pretty good, but now that there are changes made, I'd like to see that they get input as well.
Okay, so we likely need that incorporated into the resolution. So I'm looking at our parliamentarian over there. Would that be a friendly, or do I require an amendment? You'd call it a friendly. So with the mover and seconder's permission, is that considered friendly? Okay, very good. So the motion is amended as has just been suggested. And I believe you had your hand up and your hand up. So go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre, and then Councillor Paul Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I noticed that the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Association representatives are in the audience this evening. I would hope that when reviewing this on behalf of the Oceanside Accessibility Committee, sandwich boards have been a thorn in the side of folk that have ambulatory problems and visual problems. So I'm hoping that in terms of where the sidewalk widths don't permit, there'd be some creativity in terms of hopefully, if not removing the sandwich boards, placing them in such a way that they wouldn't impede progress or cause someone to fall, preferably to have another type of signage rather than sandwich boards. And I have to make that statement on behalf of the Accessibility Committee because it comes up at almost every meeting about sandwich boards.
All right, thank you. Councillor Powell Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to our Director of Community Planning. You knew this was coming. I was really pleased to go through this report and see the corrections or the suggestions, changes that had been brought forward. I'm glad it's going back to the communities because quite some time has passed since we've seen this. I just want to clarify that under the definition of obsolete sign, meaning that any sign framework which advertises or publicizes a business or undertaking that no longer exists at the premises or property on which the sign is located or pertains. Okay, so you know the definition. My question to you is, referring to page 77 under removal of signs, paragraph 14.1, when a business vacates a parcel or premises, all signs and their supporting structures on the parcel or premises which relate to that business shall be removed within 30 days. So I know that this is new coming into this sign bylaw, and so just in very simple terms, that means that signs that are in existence where the business no longer exists can now be, we have grounds for removing them?
Mayor, Worship, through Councillor Powell Davidson, yes, that is correct.
Thanks.
Further comments, questions from members of council? All right, seeing no hands in the air then, we have a motion before us. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, we're going to give you a break now, Mr. Russell, and we'll move on. And you're up at bat, Mrs. Comas, and it's going to be a report, item E, regarding unsightly property, 403 Wembley Road.
Can I?
Yes.
Point of order, Your Worship.
You wanted a point of order?
I just noticed that I meant to bring this up earlier, but I noticed that E and F are identical twins. It's the same old story. People don't cooperate. I was wondering if we couldn't vote on both of them simultaneously, if that's permitted under the voting, rather than deal with one at a time. Let's give it short shift, which it deserves.
Well, that's entirely up to council. If the council wishes to consider those two items as one block, you can certainly do that. Do we require a motion just to consider those as one? Yeah, and I think that's what you're suggesting. Is there any member of council that would have an issue with that, given the subject matter?
I'm just not sure I heard Ms. Comas correctly. Did you say vote on all four?
Regarding unsightly properties only, right?
Oh, okay, thank you. I was looking for
I think you're sensing, ladies and gentlemen, a lack of patience on our part regarding unsightly properties, and it even goes to the point of having to listen to all of the details. So no one objects to doing that as a group? You don't want to pull anything out of those four recommendations for a separate discussion? All right, so Mrs. Comas, if you wouldn't mind a succinct report on all four recommendations, please.
Your Worship, the purpose of these reports is to provide council with information regarding properties located at 403 Wembley Road, 421 Morison, and 119, 139, 161, and 173 Moilliet Street. All of the properties are vacant and have been owned by the same companies over the last several years and are repeat offenders in all cases. And the recommendations are as per the council agenda.
All right, so do we have a mover and a seconder for those recommendations? So moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any discussion? This is voting on all those recommendations combined. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on, ladies and gentlemen. So we're jumping ahead now to item G, and that is regarding our Grant and Aid Select Committee. And again, Mrs. Comas, if you could give us the background regarding the fall 2013 Grant and Aid applications, please.
Yes, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to request Council approval of the recommendations from the 2013 Fall Grant and Aid Committee prepared in response to applications received under the semi-annual grant program, and the recommendations are as per the Council agenda.
All right, so you have a recommendation before you, Council, and you're moving that. All right, so moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I think we finally broke them down, eh? All right. We'll all hear about it later. You can be rest assured, one by one, relentlessly. Okay, moving on to bylaws, ladies and gentlemen. We have one bylaw for 3 readings, and we actually have one bylaw, I believe, for adoption, and a third bylaw for a third reading. So the first item, of course, is the Permissive Taxation Exemption Bylaw 2013 number 1500, and this is up for 3 readings, I believe, and I need that as a motion. Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. To go back to the Our Savior Lutheran Church. So we're approving the permissive tax for 2014, correct? And so they're trying to subdivide their property. And so how does that play into their approval of the permissive tax for 2014? Should we take that out of this bylaw, or do we leave it in? Is it still appropriate?
Go ahead, Mr. Manson.
If I may, Your Worship, with regards to this, if and when the subdivision is approved and granted, the new lots would become their own fee simple lots, and accordingly they would no longer be eligible for a permissive exemption. As of right this second, it is still one lot, and as one lot, it is eligible for a permissive exemption. As the future goes on and it changes, the part that is subdivided off would automatically now become taxable as an ordinary fee simple lot would.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Further comments? Go ahead, Councillor Powell Davidson.
Just to follow up to Councillor Powell's question, would that be retroactive? So if tomorrow their lot gets subdivided and becomes fee simple, they would not start, the taxes would not be accrued from tomorrow forward for the rest of the year. It would be taxed in the next year. Is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, with regards to this, it's the state and condition of the property as at October the 31st, or when our bylaw is passed. I can't remember the exact dates, but I believe it is October the 31st, where the BC Assessment Authority sets the roll. So it's what the state and conditions of the properties within the city as at that date. That's how they're taxed for the next year. So regardless of what we do, or regardless of what occurs with this property, if that's the state and condition October the 31st, even if it was subdivided on November the 1st, it would still be eligible for the full permissive exemption for 2014. Come 2015, it would now be the 5 lots, the main one that the church remains, and the 4 new. The 4 new ones would be fee simple lots and would no longer be eligible for permissive exemption.
Clear? Okay, further questions, comments? All right. I think the snag regarding Forward House I can likely bring up under new business, I presume. All right, and I'll enlighten you all to that in a moment. So you see Councillor Morison, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we put this to pass last time, I had asked staff if the people that were bringing down to 50% exemption, the ones that we did, whether they were suitably notified, so it wasn't coming as kind of a slap in the face when they refilled their paperwork. based on the letter that we received from the Parksville Fish and Game Club, as well as the conversations I've had, that people really didn't know that that change was happening. So now we've put people in a position where they've made their budgets and they're applying for an exemption that they assumed they would get based on previous experience, and now it's submitted their paperwork, and we put forward a bylaw that now changes that. Obviously, if they'd written through all the paperwork, but I think it's a long-standing issue. They've always done the same thing over and over again, and they weren't properly notified. In my eyes, that there was a change unless they'd gone through the paperwork line by line. So I'm just wondering whether or not it's the onus is on the city at all to put this off for a year, that 50% reduction in the ones we've done, because the notification was maybe not where it should have been.
Council has that prerogative. I mean, we could leave the status quo. I would suggest, though, that there was a whole lot of discussion on this issue. I saw a lot of it in the media. I got lots of input from all sectors and quarters on it. So I'm not sure how you would miss that, quite frankly. You know, that would then basically send a pretty strong message to our advisory committee of a policy that we just essentially adopted, that we no longer believe in it. It's not that I'm not, you know, somewhat feeling sympathetic to organizations that ultimately are seeing a reduction in some of their tax or permissive taxes. I guess the greater question is, should recreational organizations still have the 100%? If you disagree with that, then perhaps the better way to go about it is to challenge the policy and then see if council agrees with the policy, because that's really what this is. It's basically all recreational orientated applicants are at a 50% reduction as opposed to 100%. Anything you want to add, Councillor Greer?
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't add anything more. I think you're right on. I think this has been going on for a year now, and there's been a lot of information in the papers, along with on our websites and so on. I mean, it would, if they're not paying attention to what the city's doing, then I'm sorry, but they're out of luck.
It's not unprecedented. If there's a real hardship, they can, and you're going to hear me talk about another item here in a minute, come to council for a grant, at least for the municipal portion of the tax exemption, to ease that hardship, if you will. That's certainly an option to that organization, although I can't speak for council whether or not they would entertain that. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. I guess my question in listening to Councillor Morison through you would be to staff in terms of, was there anything specific sent to the groups that would suffer the reduction, and was there any specific correspondence or any specific notification sent out in the application for permissive taxation?
Well, the policy was provided to all of the applicants, and the policy sets it out. But when we were going through the process with the committee, we did get feedback from some groups, such as the Curling Club and the RDN, about this specific tax reduction. And they asked for legislative authority for it and those sorts of things, and they were provided with all of the information, and they didn't come back to us after that.
Further comments? All right, let's call the question on those readings at least. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. And we are now moving on to our next item, which is an item up for third reading, and that is the Intercommunity Business License Bylaw 2013 number 1499. Do I have a mover and seconder for that recommendation? Who hasn't had a chance to move anything? Go ahead, Councillor Powell Davidson, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. And any discussion on that? All right, seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried for a third time. And now I'm moving into the final adoption section. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one bylaw. It's actually up for final adoption tonight. That's Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2013, number 2000.88. And do I have a mover and a seconder for that recommendation? All right, moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell Davidson. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. Moving into the notice of motion section now, and we have one notice of motion from Councillor Lefebvre regarding election changes. You spoke to this last time. Did you want to speak to it again?
No, Your Worship. I think it speaks for itself.
Just checking. All right, so we need a mover and a seconder for this recommendation, which is that staff prepare a report regarding the proposed changes in the election reform white paper, and that when adopted, we hold information sessions for all aspiring candidates prior to the start of the next election in 2014. So I see Councillor Powell and Councillor Powell-Davidson as your mover and seconder. And no further comments, questions? Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with what we're trying to do here. I'm just querying the way it's worded, and that staff hold information sessions for all aspiring candidates prior to the start of the next local government election. So we all know that's, you know, a one-day event. So does that mean at 7 o'clock in the morning on November the 15th we're going to have this session? I think the wording is a little confusing.
I would trust in our staff that they would understand the campaign period and get it out as early as possible. Would that satisfy you? I think they've all heard. All right. All right. Any further comments, questions on the motion? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. And again, Councillor Lefebvre, you're filling up our notice of motion section, and this is regarding development cost charge relaxation for Kingsley Low Rental Housing Society, and comes on the heels of a report from them at the last meeting. Did you want to speak to this at all, Councillor Lefebvre?
Thank you, Worship. Just very, very briefly, it was made clear by the Kingsley Manor proponents that if they don't get this waiver of development cost charges, they won't be able to build the building. It's hinges on the 100% relaxation, and if they don't do that, we all know that low rent housing is in dire straits in our city. So I would urge council to support this motion.
All right. So we have a mover in. We'll call it Councillor. Whoa. Go ahead, Mr. Manson.
If I may, Your Worship, the bylaw itself already provides for relaxation of DCCs based upon an application for an affordable housing agreement. Bylaw already provides for that. I'm thinking that what you really mean is all fees, not specifically DCCs.
Yes, because all of the units in this are actually applicable to our housing bylaw that we changed.
What I'm referring to is identical to what we gave for Housewick Place. So if the fees were included, the fees are included.
Well,
it's the Housewick Place repeated.
As I said, the DCCs are actually already covered within the bylaw. As long as they apply for an affordable housing agreement, they automatically get the waiver. I think what you're talking about to be the same as the other one is the other development fees.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would then make an amendment, I don't know if it's friendly or not, the relaxation of fees similar to Housewick Place for Kingsley Manor.
Parliamentarian, is that friendly? All right. So is everyone clear around this table? Because I'm going to be calling the vote. So what you're voting on, of course, is that we support 100% fee relaxation. And that because of the type of housing this is, they already qualify for 100% DCC relaxation. So this is on the fee component. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Could I ask the question then of Mr. Manson? Have they actually applied for fee relaxation? What is the process of that, if you could, sir, please?
To the best of my knowledge, no, they haven't applied as of yet. That would be part of the process as they go through the application procedure. It can be applied for pretty much at any time.
I can shed a little bit further light on that because having had some one-on-one discussions with Mr. Round. So part of it, too, is keeping in mind that they are out seeking other sources of funding, and it makes their life a lot easier if we can show a good level of support from the municipality of the jurisdiction. So that's part of the reason why there's a rush to get this out there, just so that they can now go to the other authorities and say, okay, the city has waived fees, and obviously the DCCs are already a waived item, and that would assist them in getting further funding. Having said that, the fees are significant with any application. This is a rezoning application, so that is something you want to consider when you vote. Is that okay? Did that clarify that?
Thanks very much. That's what I basically wanted to know. Thank you.
That's what I thought. Okay, so further comments? All right, all in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay, we're moving into new business. Now, I have a couple of more official new business items, and then I've got a couple of items that will probably make you all kind of go, what? And then I thought before I bring those latter two items, I will give everyone here an opportunity to have your own little say in regard to new items. One is just an item under new business. I'm hoping we can get a motion. It's that time again, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to begin the permissive, you're going to have to get that out of my head. We're going to begin the budgeting process. So this is, of course, the initial stages of our budgeting process. And I would like a motion that an open meeting of council be held in the forum at the Civic and Technology Center, 100 Jensen Avenue East, Parksville, BC, on Thursday, October 10th, 2013 at 5 p.m. to begin that process. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell Davidson. Do we need any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And another quick item, and this is regarding permissive tax exemptions. You heard me mention Forward House earlier, so here's another kind of an awkward situation. I'll leave this up to council to decide. Essentially, though, because of a change in property, they're moving from their present location, which is actually right outside my front window of my office across the street, to a new, better location downtown, which they're all very happy about. However, because there's this process and change, they were unable to qualify for the permissive taxation exemptions. And the question before council is, would you be willing to provide some assistance to Forward House? And that would be much like I suggested to Councillor Morison earlier. It would have to be in lieu of a grant, and it would only be for the municipal portion of their tax exemption. They are, of course, an organization that does fill a pretty important gap and need inside the city, and they work with adults with developmental disabilities and allow them to lead fuller lives, and you probably see them quite a bit throughout the community as they're doing their thing. So it's up for council's consideration. You'd be prepared to move that essentially a grant be given, and that would again only be for the municipal portion. And is that a seconder, Councillor Greer? Okay, and any further discussion on that motion? Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. To what extent will they be able to use and piggyback on what we're willing to do for them as far as the RDN portion and the other portions? Will that, they would have to make application to those organizations for dispensation, I presume.
Well, as we're the tax collector, they would be making application to us. They could, I suppose, in theory, approach the other organizations for grants, although I doubt they would get them. I think it's not again, it's just a question of timing. They happen to be moving properties right at that awkward time when you have to have a definable property to qualify for permissive tax. We know what their property is going to be. They're in the process of doing that. So they would simply have to make do with about a half a portion of exemption as opposed to the full. Go ahead, Councillor Morison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do we have a total of what that'll be, an actual dollar amount?
Do we have that, Mr. Butterworth?
I don't have those numbers with me today. No.
Then why don't we do this? We'll instruct you to go ahead and make those arrangements, and they can come back to us in a motion with a specific dollar amount. Would that satisfy council? So right now, this motion is simply to direct staff then to bring back a grant for the municipal portion of permissive tax. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Richard. Just as an aside, as the city rep to the RDN, I could bring this up to the RDN to get an exemption. I know I'm very familiar with what Forward House does. I've been to some of their activities, and I'd be prepared to.
All right. Well, I certainly would appreciate that. All right. So we have a motion on the floor. The motion is to essentially direct staff to come back with the specific amount regarding a grant to cover the municipal portion of Forward House's would have been permissive tax exemption. And the mover and seconder are okay with that? Okay. So all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Keep that. Okay, so now I'm going to open the floor to members of council for other items of new business. And does any other member of council have any other item of new business? All right, go ahead, Councillor Powell Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very quickly, I had the opportunity last week to attend my first Youth Link meeting. I'm not sure if everybody is aware of this organization, but in a nutshell, every organization that offers programs or works with youth or services youth in some way sits around at the Youth Link table. And it was amazing to me to learn so much about the various services and organizations and events that are available for young people in our community. So I feel sorry for the next young person that says to me there's nothing to do in Parksville, because I'll pull out the list, and indeed there is. There's one program that I learned about at the Youth Link table that I'm going to do some more writing about, because I really want people to know. It's called Everyone Rides. If you haven't heard of this program, it's basically run in conjunction with the Family Services, and Past Woodwinds is involved in this, and a few other organizations. They provide bikes free to people who need them. So in our discussions around the transportation issues in our area, in our region, there is a program called Everyone Rides, and I'll happily share that information, or you can just go on to the new Youth Link website, which is just going to be having the hard launch this month, and learn more about how people who need a bike to get around can get a free bike. Pretty cool program.
And this is a cool program. Thank you for highlighting that. Any other members of council? All right, so we'll carry on then. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a couple of items, and council as well. Especially council, I'll need your support. I have a couple of items here that I'd like to bring forward. As you know, we have a city open house meeting, or rather a town hall style meeting coming up on the 21st. At this point, the only thing we have on the agenda is actually about the narrowing of Highway 19A, which is actually an item that we already had, and I'm not suggesting we change that, but it'll be an interesting discussion. But it'd probably be good if we got some other things on that agenda just to make it a fuller meeting. And I have a suggestion for you. And that stems out of, I guess, a frustration that I'm feeling, ladies and gentlemen, which is that we've had a narrative for a long time about municipalities coming up with alternative sources of revenue. And knowing what I know about the budget we're about to enter into, you're going to find yourselves very frustrated, because it's going to come down to taking more shine off of Parksville and or raising people's taxes, right, as every budget has. And that's becoming more and more difficult with each passing year, because we've pretty much knocked down a lot of what we already were doing, and we're already starting to get more and more complaints. And it's going to get into this sort of play field of what do you want, more services or taxes, right? So with this narrative that's been underway, I haven't seen any actual ideas coming forward about things that a municipality could actually do to make revenue. And so I have a couple of suggestions I would like to front, and what I was hoping is we might take these suggestions and give them to our Citizens Advisory Committee to chew on and mull over a little bit. And with at least one of them, I thought it might be an ideal item to add to that town hall style meeting. I'll start with a new industry that's just been created, and that, of course, is the industry of medicinal marijuana. Now, this is a unique circumstance. What we have is a federal government, by way of a very interesting piece of legislation, has created, in effect, a new industry. And that industry is, of course, the commercialization of the growing of marijuana. Now, in the latter times, there was actually a company that operated, interestingly enough, in a very large abandoned mine complex that was providing medicinal marijuana directly to the Minister of Health. It was the only company, and then others were being given the ability to grow their own, and I think most people are familiar with the status quo. That's all changing. That single source company has, I would think, lost the initial contract that they had with the government, which is on a 5-year basis. The government has put a new act in place that allows for commercial production of marijuana, although it is highly regulated and requires a significant amount of security and all kinds of hoops in order for a private industry or private individual to go ahead and work for the government in that respect. Across the water, we have Seashell, who are looking at that as an opportunity. They're actually having discussions right now about zoning areas of the city to actually attract these types of industrial players into their city. They actually will anticipatedly bring good jobs and obviously tax revenues, industrial tax revenues in some cases. And I was just reading today, a little town, Smith Falls in Ontario, is converting, working with a private individual to convert an old abandoned Hershey's factory into a rather large-scale medical marijuana production facility. So with all that in mind, I think that it might be wise for us to look to see if indeed this is, stop your laughing over there, I'm going to accuse you of something. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm going to suggest, though, that with this emergence of this new industry, maybe we need to prepare ourselves, as I've already had at least one private inquiry about whether or not a facility like this could come into, say, our industrial park or another area or even on agricultural land in and around the city. Although I want to be selfish about this. I spoke to Health Canada, and you know what? There's no reason why we, even as a municipality, given our corporate arm, could not be more directly involved in either the research and development side and or the production side, if that were to make sense, and if, of course, the community were to see that as something they would like. Ultimately, I'll give you an example. We're building a very, very expensive, and it's going to be a very high security environment water treatment plant on 20 some odd acres that we've purchased. The footprint of that plant is only a fraction of the site. One of the conditions of these facilities is a very high level of security. You've got to have somebody watching 24/7. You cannot step in or out without being logged. It has to be inspected continuously by any number of different enforcement agencies. So maybe there's some synergies there. Maybe we locate one of these facilities inside our security quarantine and suddenly we're in business. So I don't know if that makes any sense or not. My idea is to basically give it to our Citizens Advisory Committee to look at it and to see what in different ways we might be able to get involved. And it may just come down to simply having the right zoning in place, but maybe there are some things that we can do that might even give us a ground floor jump at a brand new industry, which I suspect will be growing, no pun intended, for a number of years here. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to comment on your initial request to give it to the advisory committee to chew on. I'm glad that you changed it from chewing on to consider.
To grow. Yeah. Well, you know, it is very interesting. There's quite a research and development aspect to this. I don't want to ramble because I will do that from time to time, but there's a much more to this than meets the eye. It's much more like a pharmaceutical industry than it is about growing marijuana. There's opportunities to develop strains for specific ailments, and there's quite a number of elements to it. And I seriously think, I mean, there's very few times where you have a new industry emerging just like that overnight. And if you can get in on the ground floor, you might position yourself very well.
May I make another comment? I'm just thinking about all the volunteer opportunities to try out the marijuana for people that have certain ills. It would be wonderful. There we go. We have a first volunteer in the audience.
There are, just to give you an idea of how much the government wants to keep their finger on this, because they obviously got burned with the status quo, there are something like 11 layers of security clearance. So, I mean, the individuals that are involved are vetted and vetted and vetted again. It is quite a complex environment. So there's that, and I'm hoping that we can get a motion to direct that to the advisory committee to analyze. Well, hold on. There's another one here that I want to throw at you, because this one is a little bit different. I'm going to bring out the C word here, and that is casino, ladies and gentlemen. So I just did a very quick summation, just for interest, because you know what? We need to start making some money other than hitting the taxpayer constantly. And I can already hear Councillor Powell sighing, and I understand why. There are two sides to this. However, on the pro side, perhaps, there are currently casinos on the island in Campbell River, Courtenay, Cowichan, Nanaimo, Port Alberni, and View Royal. And they generate revenue for their respective municipalities that ranges from $4.1 million per year to a low in Port Alberni of $426,000 per year. That is direct revenue into the municipality. Not to mention that they create quite a bit of employment. And interestingly enough, we have to remember that not all casinos are the same. Often these casinos are tied with amenities. So it could be tied into a convention center, there's a theater, there can be all sorts of amenities. This is not a decision that we can make as a council, clearly. This is something for the province that ultimately would have to clear this. And I think a topic like this, because there's obviously a downside to this as well, is something that we would probably want to ensure that our community was on board with before we tried to lobby for it. So what I'm suggesting is if we're serious about generating some alternative revenues, we're one of the few cities on the island, and certainly the only resort community left on the island, and we have 1,200 rooms, folks, that doesn't have a casino in some area. This may be something to consider. So on this one, I would like to add that with the medicinal marijuana and give that to the Citizens Advisory Committee to do a bit further research on. And yeah, and I will let you move that. And then, well, why don't we do that? So go ahead, move that, Councillor Greer, if that's what you agree with.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll move both those motions.
Okay, well, we'll call it one motion, but those two items?
Yes,
okay.
both items.
I see a seconder in Councillor Neufeld. Discussion on those two items, and then I'm going to ask for that second one, the casino one, to go to our actual meeting on the 21st. But go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson and Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. And in sending those two items for discussion to the Citizens Advisory Group, could we also add that they discuss any other possible out-of-the-box thinking towards revenue generation? Because I wouldn't want to just limit them to those two options for discussion. I'd like, maybe they have, with their creative minds, have some other revenue-generating ideas that we haven't even thought about.
Well, you kind of stole my thunder, because at the end I was going to conclude by saying, an open invitation to anyone, if they want to be creative, to bring forward ideas. We'll look at anything, right? I don't know if I want to load them up with too much, because time is of the essence, certainly on the medicinal marijuana side. Lots of municipalities are moving quite quickly now to position themselves, so I don't want to waste too much time, but I mean, I think you can certainly talk with them in general about just coming up with concepts, and I would extend that to all members of council. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that another way of raising revenue that was discussed at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conference was sponsorships, sponsoring your parks, your ballparks, that sort of thing, going to big companies that are prepared to offer money to do that on a long-term basis. And it's done in such a way that it's an RFP. And you invite people to bid on what kind of dollars they would put towards sponsorship. I use, for example, maybe the ballparks, the community park, whatever. There'd be a number of things that you could do to raise funds. And just in passing, I've written Thursday's headline for the newspaper for Mr. Ravinsky. Gambling and drugs keeps your city beautiful.
Well, thank you for that, Councillor Lefebvre. So, Councillor Greer, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, our committee will work on that, and I'm sure they'll do an excellent job. I have also got about 6 different ideas, and Mark's idea of sponsorship was one. However, I have about 6 others, but we'll maybe throw it past our committee and see what they think of it. And these came actually from the UBCM meeting in 2010 that I attended, and we really haven't done anything about it, but I think there's some good possibilities here as well.
All right, very good. So on the motion for those two items, any further discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. I just wanted to then take this next item, which is on the casino, and just put that to that meeting, only to get a very quick sort of sense of where the community might stand on that. I realize it's complex. Location can mean a lot when it comes to it. The kind of style and whatnot can mean a lot. But just in the general principle, I thought that might be a good thing to just throw out there to begin a conversation with. And if we're inundated with people with pitchforks, then maybe this is something we back off on. But if we see some folks that think it might be reasonable, then we might want to pursue it further. So did you have that as a motion then, Councillor Morison? All right, so moved by Councillor Morison, seconded by Councillor Powell-Davidson. Any discussion? Some of this is going to rub off on you, I assure you, although I'll take most of the blame for anybody that's upset. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. I think that it's very timely that we're going to be having the discussion on the budget, and there's no doubt that there are tough times ahead. The economy, the general economy, is not doing all that well. There's talk of another recession, so any other ways that we can find to get more revenue would be very worthwhile. And facing the opposite to that is if we don't, well, then we're looking at the tough choices of raising taxes.
Go ahead, Councillor Morison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment, and I've had discussions with several people since we kind of said it anecdotally about a week ago, and I was quite surprised at the responses all the way from, I know Councillor Powell was concerned about the detrimental aspects of casinos, but I got the same kind of responses from some of my friends as well that I know travel downtown and I won't go to the casinos. It really comes down to, like you said, the locations and things, where it's situated. So I'm interested to see the feedback we get.
Well, the City of Nanaimo thanks your friends. They generate $2.4 million a year direct revenue.